The Dong Dai Moon Design Plaza, I'll call it DDP, is a major urban development landmark in Seoul, designed with a distinctly neo-futurist design. What are the elements of creativity here, and how could they be taught? This landmark is a centerpiece of South Korea's fashion hub and a popular tourist destination. It features a walkable park on its roofs, large global exhibition spaces, futuristic retail stores, and restored parts of the Seoul fortress. What are the elements of creativity here that you see? And how are these taught? And how do the different subject areas join into this process of teaching creativity? Know that South Korea is very clear they want to stay on the leading edge of technology, invention, and innovation as a way of planning for the future and sustaining a relatively high standard of living. Here it is at night. What looked solid during the day becomes just a glowing structure at night. There are multi-purpose convention halls here and a number of exhibition halls. The building acts as a testbed platform for various corporate design products, as well as a place for international cultural exchange and cooperation. Here's a close-up again at night as it comes alive with lights. So let's look at the elements of creativity and how they might fit here. Stretching. Architects certainly had to stretch. Everyone is being challenged to discover the value of this. There was plenty of opposition, but the innovators had their way, and everyone is discovering what the impact really is. It has sparked lots of discussion just being in the building for any number of different reasons. The question for the whole country is about their readiness to take on this kind of innovation. It has introduced some tensions because Korea is a very old culture and there are lots of arguments to preserve that history and tradition. Time will tell how valuable this investment has been. There was certainly great motivation on the part of those who designed it. Interesting how little mention there is of creativity in the most popular books on teaching in higher education. And you wonder in the worlds of architecture and design, how much is mentioned of creativity. The core books in Teaching and Learning talk about tips, tools, and techniques with very little substantive reference to creativity. In contrast, our emphasis of concepts in this course asks all instructors to step back and take a broader look at the issues that surround the disciplines and whether or not students need to know about creativity and how your discipline could contribute to that. So for Patrick, there's a preparation period. Looking back on this DDP project, we could examine what time was invested. Was it the right amount? Should there have been more? There's a period of incubation when the ideas first surfaced and how people handled that time. You wonder if there was an illumination period when someone came up with this design and then that energy, excitement spread. And I suppose verification will take time as people use the building and explore, examine, assess its contribution. Fanon talks about the various locks on creativity. Given the redevelopment, was this the right answer? Just a creative response? Was it logical to build this or not? What was logical? Were there pressures to conform to other designs? Was there a call for practicality? Was there pressure to stay on task and get it built and perhaps forestall the creative process? Were people uncomfortable with the ambiguity of this futuristic design? Was there fear of making a mistake, building square buildings that replicated what was built elsewhere? May have been the safer avenue, but the majority of people in leadership positions apparently wanted to do something really innovative. Certainly the building is playful. Does that make it difficult for some people? Do they want a more serious building with high-rise features? Do some struggle because they don't believe they have that creativity inside them? In another book, he talks about the roles we need. If you look back on this project, can you see the role of explorers who wanted to advocate for something new and different? When did the artists come out who could see different kinds of buildings that had different qualities, different aesthetic qualities? Did the designers allow themselves the room to think and roam and look at new and different ways? In this second book, Vonnegut introduces two other roles for creativity. The judge must at some point come in and say, how viable is this project? In this case, the DDP project. Does it make sense for what we want it to do? And finally, the role of warrior, of taking action and actually building it and standing up to the critics. Listen to Mary Noby's comments about creativity and teaching of a construction management program. The lesson on creativity has been difficult because, quote, I tend not to bring my creativity in the classroom, and as evidenced by my work with other professors in surveying and their textbooks, it's obvious that few others do either. Interesting to know how the design people were able to step outside the conventional textbooks in Korea and get this design through, approved, and built. Noby writes, therefore, it becomes very difficult to step outside the box of how to teach surveying in a lecture format. You wonder how people were able to step outside how they were taught about building design. She writes, often students leave lecture in a daze with the promise that it will all click in lab. Noby writes, I thought about omitting the lecture and just using the labs to teach. However, I feel that too much of the fundamentals will not get taught. You wonder in Korea if the people who did the design, if they had to really step away from the way they were taught to get into something new and different. Then Noby writes, if I could be more creative with my presentations by invoking students' imagination and my own, it would give new purpose to lecture and challenges to the students. You wonder in South Korea if there were several teachers who got involved to support and promote new and different thinking. Gordon writes about creativity that it's not mysterious. Now that these buildings are built, you walk inside, and from the inside they look like many other buildings. There are rooms and spaces, and yet from the outside it's dramatically different. Gordon writes, creativity can be developed and utilized in all fields. Here you have design, architecture, engineering, urban planning, and Gordon argues people can be trained to be more creative. Think back to Noby's comments. Would her students be well served if they were trained to be more creative? And Gordon says there's value in the use of the non-rational. How did the leaders of this South Korean development, how do they tap into people's emotional feelings about something new and different? So Gordon says we can all pay more attention to creativity by paying attention to our spontaneous sides, our playful reactions, noting our concrete experiences and analogies as catalysts for getting fresh perspectives. So looking carefully at the details of our concrete experiences and what analogies and metaphors come to mind that can get us thinking in new and different ways. Looking at what we already know as well as getting new insights into what could be. So Gordon focuses on metaphorical thinking. What is it like in concrete terms to try to design this kind of a building? What images come to mind? What would it feel like to be that new design? How would it feel in this case with the DDP of being futuristic and practical at the same time. Working with creativity helps make the familiar strange, so a building into something futuristic, and the strange familiar, something futuristic into a building that can be used. In our book on diversity, we raise a number of similar aspects of creativity. We welcome contradictions. So for many in South Korea, this building put them on edge. But yet, we all must move forward into the future. So is there something healthy in what they've designed here? There is obviously ongoing research in building design. And were they successful here in connecting new thinking to new building design? Do you think the designers were able to introduce new ways of thinking by creating the space? Could they make use of different perspectives in defining a building of the future? Could they invite new thinking with this kind of design? Could they help anyone here stretch in new ways? The easy answer might have been straight walls and square buildings. And they embraced something very different and complex. This design certainly challenges traditional assumptions about buildings. It would be a wonderful experience for any student interested in design or architecture to come and explore the space. What about the role of empathy for people who want to be creative or who are committed to old ways of doing things? You wonder if they were able to de-emphasize evaluation while they came up with this design. Did people with a background in the performing arts involve themselves? Did the leaders of this project somehow manage to orchestrate diversity of contributions? I wonder if they used simulations. Did they go places where there were innovative designs? Does this building say anything about the heart, about emotions? Does it invite diverse individuals to the table to discuss their ideas? Does it broaden the range of ideas that are surfacing because it's so new and different? Does it really challenge people to commit to personal growth if they're stuck in old ways and the way buildings have to be built? Does it help any visitor see the world through other lenses? Interestingly, across the street in the evenings, there were a number of stages set up and free public concerts were given up and down the streets across from this complex. In our book on teaching and performing, we note how even the best material can get lost with poor delivery. Here's a stunning building. Does it add to the content of what's being discussed? We write, you can stimulate deeper learning among students if you challenge them to think creatively and critically. I wonder if the space will get South Koreans to think differently. Is there value in the energy, creativity, and spontaneity that's represented in the building? In understanding how performers breathe life into written scripts, does this building, with its innovative design, help anyone, inspire anyone to think differently about their own work? In my book on the instructional map, I offer these because of the inherently subjective nature of creativity, and agreeing on clear outcomes for student learning is problematic. Maybe one of the challenges for South Koreans is not to get too focused on just the outcome, how many visitors, how many creative ideas, but to stay open to the greater value that's more difficult to assess. What any of us can do is create opportunities for people to stretch their usual way of responding and tap into other capacities and practice being creative. Certainly, this DDP building was an opportunity to practice something new and different. The question will be is how effective, how successful. Accordingly, assessments of efforts will be largely subjective. It may be years before we know how effective this building was in sparking new ideas. Until then, we have to use our own judgment. Gardner talks about multiple intelligences. In schools, we tend to focus on reading, writing, and logical, mathematical. According to Gardner, other intelligences includes the visual, spatial. You certainly see those here in the DDP. Gardner talks about the intrapersonal and interpersonal. People will have reactions to this building. And so whether it's their own feelings or how they relate to others, these skills and abilities will be on display. There's bodily kinesthetic learning for hands-on experiences. By walking around this building, you see something new and different, and it's memorable. Gardner says there's a musical quality. Interesting that there were free concerts across the street. And he says there's an existential, spiritual, and natural ability, intelligence. And you wonder if this building evoked any of that. Questions to ponder. How can you use the principles of creativity when teaching in your subject area? What is the value of creative, active, and interactive efforts to explore questions and topics for student learning?